February 14th, 1965, 9 days before his assassination. Malcolm X sat across from Bumpy Johnson in a booth at Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue. The place was nearly empty. 2:00 a.m. Just the two of them, a pot of coffee, and a conversation that would haunt Bumpy for the rest of his life. "They're going to kill me," Malcolm said quietly. Not afraid, just stating a fact. Bumpy leaned forward. "Then let me stop them." Malcolm smiled, that sad, knowing smile of a man who'd already accepted his fate. "You know I can't do that, brother." "Why not?" "Because if you protect me with guns, they'll have to kill you too. And then more people, and more after that. The violence won't stop. It never does." Bumpy Johnson, the man who'd survived 40 years in Harlem's underworld, the man who'd faced down Dutch Schultz and the Italian mafia, the man who'd never backed down from a fight, sat there looking at his friend. And for one of the few times in his life, he had no answer. Malcolm X would be dead in 9 days, shot 21 times in the Audubon Ballroom. And Bumpy Johnson would spend the rest of his life wondering if he could have stopped it. This is the story of a friendship between two legends. A friendship built on mutual respect, shattered by principle, and ended by bullets. The story of what happened when Malcolm X chose death over compromise, and why that choice still breaks hearts 60 years later. To understand this friendship, you need to understand how it began. 1952. Malcolm X was Malcolm Little then, 27 years old, fresh out of prison. 6 years he'd spent in Charlestown and Norfolk, transforming himself from street hustler to devoted student of Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam. When Malcolm was released, he came to Harlem, stayed at a boarding house on St. Nicholas Avenue, started working as a minister at Temple No. 7 on 116th Street. He was on fire with purpose, converting dozens of people a week, preaching black pride, self-sufficiency, separation from white America. And he was being watched, not just by the FBI, though they'd started their file on him. He was being watched by Harlem itself, by the hustlers, numbers runners, and street soldiers who'd known him when he was Detroit Red, a cocaine dealer and con man. They wondered if this new Malcolm was real or an act. Bumpy Johnson wondered too. Bumpy was 45 then, 16 years deep into his reign as Harlem's unofficial mayor. He'd seen plenty of con men use religion as a hustle, plenty of smooth talkers who preached morality while running scams. So when Malcolm X started drawing crowds at Temple No. 7, Bumpy went to see for himself. What he found surprised him. Malcolm wasn't preaching to get rich. He lived in a tiny room, wore the same suit 3 days a week, ate simple meals. Every dollar he collected went back into the Nation of Islam. And his message, while controversial, was something Bumpy recognized. Self-determination, black economic power, refusing to bow to white supremacy. These were ideas Bumpy had lived his entire life. He'd just used different methods. After one of Malcolm's speeches, Bumpy approached him, introduced himself. Malcolm knew exactly who he was. Everyone in Harlem knew Bumpy Johnson. They talked for 3 hours that night. About Harlem, about what black people needed, about power and how to get it. They disagreed on methods. Malcolm believed in moral authority and organized political action. Bumpy believed in economic leverage and the threat of force. But they agreed on the goal. A Harlem where black people controlled their own destiny. That conversation became many conversations, then a friendship, not public. Malcolm's position in the Nation of Islam made it complicated to be seen with a known gangster, and Bumpy's reputation made it risky to be associated with a revolutionary preacher. But privately, they respected each other. Bumpy saw in Malcolm something rare, a man with principles who couldn't be bought. Malcolm saw in Bumpy something equally rare, a man with power who genuinely cared about his community. Through the 1950s, their relationship deepened. Malcolm would come to Bumpy for advice about Harlem politics. Who to trust, which businesses were legitimate, which cops could be reasoned with. Bumpy would attend Malcolm's speeches, sit in the back, listen. Sometimes he'd send word through intermediaries about threats Malcolm didn't know about. Nation of Islam rivals, white supremacist groups, FBI infiltrators. Bumpy protected Malcolm without Malcolm knowing. It was how Bumpy operated. Quiet, effective, no credit needed. In 1963, everything changed. Malcolm's relationship with Elijah Muhammad fractured. Multiple reasons. Ideological differences. Malcolm discovering that Elijah had fathered children with young secretaries, violating the moral code he preached. The Kennedy assassination, where Malcolm's comment about chickens coming home to roost got him suspended from the nation. But the real break was deeper. Malcolm was evolving. After his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964, he'd seen Muslims of all races praying together. It challenged his previous belief in complete racial separation. He started talking about coalition building, about working with progressive whites, about international human rights rather than just American civil rights. The Nation of Islam saw this as betrayal. Elijah Muhammad, growing older and more paranoid, saw Malcolm as a threat, a man with too much charisma, too much influence, too many followers who might split from the nation. By late 1964, Malcolm knew he was in danger. He'd formed his own organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. He was traveling internationally, speaking to packed audiences. But he was also receiving death threats. His house in Queens was firebombed. His phone was tapped. Men in dark suits followed him everywhere. December 1964. Malcolm met with Bumpy at Wells Restaurant, their usual spot. Bumpy saw immediately that something was wrong. "They're planning something," Malcolm said. "The nation. I've heard things." Who specifically? Malcolm named names. Men Bumpy knew. Some were Nation of Islam enforcers. Others were street thugs the nation had recruited. All of them were dangerous. Bumpy made a decision. "I'll have them dealt with." "No." Malcolm's voice was firm. "No violence." "Malcolm, these men are going to kill you." "Maybe, but if you kill them first, you'll start a war. The nation will retaliate. You'll have to retaliate back. Where does it end?" "It ends with you alive." Malcolm looked at his friend. "Brother, I've been preparing for this my whole life. I used to be a criminal. I used to carry guns. I used to live by violence. That life nearly destroyed me. Prison saved me. Islam saved me. I can't go back to that life, not even to save my own life." January 1965. The threats intensified. Malcolm's speaking engagements were being disrupted by Nation of Islam members. They'd shout him down, call him traitor, Judas, hypocrite. Sometimes it turned physical, shoving, punches thrown. Malcolm's security team, small and mostly unarmed, struggled to protect him. Bumpy watched from a distance. He had people at every Malcolm X event, watching, waiting, ready to intervene if things got too dangerous. But Malcolm had made it clear, no guns, no violence. It went against everything Bumpy believed in. In Bumpy's world, when someone threatened you, you showed strength. You made them afraid to act. You eliminated the threat before it eliminated you. That's how he'd survived 40 years in Harlem's underworld. But Malcolm operated by different rules. He believed that meeting violence with violence would only prove his enemies right, would give them justification to call him a criminal, would undermine everything he'd built. So he refused protection, refused to carry a weapon, refused to let his followers arm themselves. He would face his fate with moral courage, not physical force. February 5th, 1965. Malcolm's house in Queens was firebombed while his family slept inside. Malcolm, his wife Betty, and their 4 daughters barely escaped. The youngest was 6 months old. They stood in the street in their nightclothes, watching their home burn. The next day, Bumpy showed up at the hotel where Malcolm's family was staying. He didn't call ahead, didn't ask permission. just appeared. "This ends now," Bumpy said. "I'm putting 10 men on you. Armed, professional. They'll rotate shifts. You don't go anywhere without them." Malcolm was exhausted, traumatized. His daughters had nearly died, but he still refused. "Bumpy, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I do. But I can't have armed guards. I can't live that way. If I accept protection through violence, I'm saying that violence is the answer. And if violence is the answer, then everything I've taught is a lie. Your family almost died last night. I know." Malcolm's voice cracked. "Don't you think I know? Don't you think I lay awake wondering if my principles are worth my children's lives? Then let me protect them, not you. Them." For a moment, Malcolm hesitated. Bumpy saw it. The crack in the armor, the father warring with the philosopher. But then Malcolm shook his head. "If they're protected and I'm not, I'll just worry every second that I'm away from them. I can't live that way either. I have to trust that Allah will protect us. And if He doesn't, then my death will serve a purpose. It'll wake people up. Or it'll just make you dead," Bumpy said quietly. "Maybe both." February 14th, 1965, Valentine's Day, 9 days before the assassination. Their last conversation. Malcolm had called Bumpy, asked to meet, said it was important. They sat in their usual booth at Wells Restaurant. 2:00 a.m., the city sleeping around them. "I need you to promise me something," Malcolm said. "What?" "When they kill me, and they will, I need you to promise you won't retaliate." Bumpy stared at him. "You can't ask me that." "I'm asking anyway. If you kill the men who kill me, you'll start a war. The nation will come after you. Your organization will fight back. People will die. Innocent people. The same people I've spent my life trying to help. I need you to promise you'll let it go. Malcolm, promise me, brother." Bumpy Johnson, who'd never backed down from a challenge, who'd faced down the most dangerous men in New York, who'd built an empire on the principle that respect comes from strength, sat there looking at his friend, a man asking him to do nothing while he walked into his own execution. "I promise," Bumpy finally said. A lie. They both knew it was a lie. Malcolm smiled that sad smile again. "Thank you for saying it anyway." They sat in silence for a while. Then Malcolm spoke again. "You know what's funny? People think we're so different. You're the gangster. I'm the revolutionary. You use violence. I use words. But we both want the same thing. We both want our people to be free. We use different methods. Do we, though? You protect people with fear. I protect people with inspiration. But we're both trying to protect them. Maybe that's all anyone can ask for, that we tried." "You could still change your mind," Bumpy said. "Let me put men on you, just for a few weeks, until this blows over." "It's not going to blow over. And even if it did, what kind of life would that be? Constantly guarded, constantly afraid, always looking over my shoulder. That's not living. That's just existing." "Existing beats dying." "Does it? I'm not sure anymore." Malcolm looked out the window at Harlem. His Harlem. The place he'd poured everything into. "I used to be afraid of death. When I was Detroit Red, hustling and robbing, I was terrified I'd end up dead in an alley somewhere. But then prison changed me. Islam changed me. I learned that death is just another door. And if I've lived my life right, if I've stayed true to my principles, then whatever's on the other side of that door can't be worse than compromising everything I believe in. That's easy to say when you're still alive. Is it? I don't know. What I do know is that if I accept armed protection, if I meet violence with violence, then I'm just another guy with a gun. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not a minister. I'm just a scared man trying to survive. And survival isn't enough for me anymore. It has to mean something. My life has to mean something. Bumpy wanted to argue. wanted to tell Malcolm that dying for principles was stupid, that the dead don't lead revolutions, that you can't change the world from a grave. But looking at Malcolm's face, seeing the peace there, the acceptance, Bumpy understood. Malcolm had made his choice. Not out of stupidity, not out of stubbornness, out of a belief so deep, so fundamental, that compromise was worse than death. It was the same kind of belief that had driven Bumpy to stand up to Dutch Schultz when he was outnumbered 12-1. The same belief that made him walk into Small's paradise to face Marcus Henderson alone. The same belief that made him call the mayor after the 1943 riot and demand justice. They were more alike than either wanted to admit. They just expressed their courage differently. February 21st, 1965. 3:10 p.m. Audubon Ballroom. Malcolm X was shot 21 times. 3 men rushed the stage while he was speaking. They used shotguns and handguns. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Malcolm died at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital 40 minutes later. He was 39 years old. Bumpy Johnson was at his social club on 8th Avenue when the news came. Someone burst in, turned on the radio. The announcer's voice shook as he reported the shooting. Malcolm X, the controversial civil rights leader, had been assassinated. Bumpy didn't move, didn't react, just sat there listening as the details came in. The number of shots, the witnesses, the chaos, the blood. His lieutenants waited for orders. They knew Bumpy and Malcolm were friends. They knew Bumpy had offered protection. They expected retaliation, expected Bumpy to declare war on the Nation of Islam, expected bodies by sunrise. But Bumpy remembered his promise, the lie he'd told Malcolm 9 days earlier. "We do nothing," Bumpy said quietly. "Boss, I said we do nothing. Malcolm didn't want a war. We're not starting one." It was the hardest decision Bumpy Johnson ever made. Harder than facing Dutch Schultz. Harder than standing up to the Italians. Harder than spending a decade in Alcatraz. Because doing nothing went against every instinct he had. Every principle he'd lived by. Every lesson he'd learned about power and respect. But he kept his word. Not because he'd promised Malcolm, but because he'd promised himself. He would honor his friend's final wish, even if it killed him to do it. 3 men were arrested for Malcolm's murder. Talmadge Hayer, Norman 3X Butler, and Thomas 15X Johnson. All 3 had ties to the Nation of Islam. Hayer confessed immediately. Butler and Johnson maintained their innocence. They were all convicted. Served 20 years. Decades later, evidence emerged suggesting Butler and Johnson were innocent. That the actual killers escaped. That the FBI and NYPD had covered up their investigation. In 2021, their convictions were vacated. 56 years too late. Bumpy Johnson died 3 years after Malcolm, 1968. Heart attack at Wells Restaurant. The same place where he'd had his last conversation with his friend. Some people said it was poetic. Others said Bumpy died of a broken heart. That losing Malcolm, then being unable to avenge him, took something from Bumpy that never came back. When Bumpy died, his funeral was attended by thousands, but notably absent were members of the Nation of Islam. They knew Bumpy's reputation. Knew he could have destroyed them if he'd wanted to. Knew he'd chosen not to. It was Malcolm's final gift to Harlem, preventing a war that would have torn the community apart. Even in death, Malcolm protected his people. Just not in the way Bumpy would have chosen. The friendship between Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X was brief. Less than 13 years, but it represented something profound. 2 men with different methods but the same goal. 2 men who respected each other, despite fundamental disagreements. 2 men who showed that strength comes in many forms. Malcolm's strength was moral courage. The courage to stand for principles even when it costs everything. The courage to refuse violence even when violence is hunting you. The courage to believe that your death might mean more than your life. Bumpy's strength was protective love. The love of a man who would do anything to keep his people safe, who would compromise his own principles to save others, who would carry the weight of inaction for the rest of his life because his friend asked him to. Neither man was perfect. Bumpy dealt heroin that destroyed families. Malcolm once preached separation and hatred before evolving his views. Both made mistakes. Both carried regrets. But in their friendship, in that final conversation at Wells' restaurant, they showed something beautiful and tragic. They showed that love sometimes means letting go, that respect sometimes means accepting another person's choice, even when it breaks your heart. That courage has many faces. Malcolm X chose to die with his principles intact. Bumpy Johnson chose to live with his hands tied. Both choices required tremendous strength. Both came with tremendous cost. And both still echo 60 years later, asking us questions we haven't answered. When is compromise acceptable? When is violence justified? Is it better to die for what you believe in, or to live and keep fighting imperfectly? Can you protect people who don't want protection? Should you? These aren't easy questions. Malcolm and Bumpy didn't have easy answers. They just made their choices and lived and died with the consequences. February 14th, 1965, Valentine's Day, the day Malcolm X asked Bumpy Johnson to let him die. 9 days later, Malcolm was gone. 3 years after that, so was Bumpy. But the love between them, the respect, the agonizing choice, that's still here. Still teaching us, still breaking our hearts, because that's what real friendship looks like sometimes. Not saving each other, respecting each other enough to let go, even when it kills you to do it. If this story of friendship and principle moved you, subscribe for more untold stories from Harlem's history. Drop a like if you understand that sometimes love means letting someone make their own choice. And in the comments, tell me, was Malcolm right to refuse protection? Or should Bumpy have insisted? Share this with someone who needs to hear that courage comes in many forms, that principles matter, that love sometimes means honoring someone's choice even when it breaks your heart.